Saigon, April 29, 1975. Two years after a ceasefire agreement promised peace in Vietnam. 10 years after America sent combat troops into its longest war. 20 years after an international conference divided Vietnam. 30 years after the communists launched their struggle for Vietnam's independence. After a generation of battle, Hanoi's commanding general proclaimed their great spring victory. Finally, for America, it was the end of the tunnel.
A ceasefire, internationally supervised, will begin at 7 p.m. this Saturday, January 27, Washington time. Within 60 days from this Saturday, all Americans held prisoners of war
throughout Indochina will be released. There will be the fullest possible accounting for all of those who are missing in action. During the same 60-day period, all American forces will be withdrawn from South Vietnam. The people of South Vietnam have been guaranteed the right to determine their own future.
Mất công bình.
We were absolutely furious about the agreement. It was an injustice, more a death sentence for us than a peace agreement. We'd never seen anything more illogical. It called for the withdrawal of only the American forces, and not the withdrawal of other foreign troops, such as the Vietnamese communists.
The South Vietnamese government greeted the Paris Accords with a defiant display of flags. The red and yellow banners were put out as symbols of loyalty on orders of the Saigon regime, which had signed the agreement under intense pressure from President Nixon. In the countryside, a checkerboard of flags, often within sight of one another, marked the territory of the opposing sides. The agreement left Viet Cong and North Vietnamese forces in the zones they controlled in the south, awaiting a political compromise. The communists welcomed the agreement as recognition of their legitimacy. They did not see themselves as aggressors. To them, the Americans had been the aggressors.
We always trained our soldiers to love their country and to hate aggressors. We were not invading any country, and we were determined to prevent any country from invading us and trampling on the land of our ancestors.
Both sides knew the struggle was not over. Two huge armies, one equipped by America, the other by the Soviet Union, stood poised head to head over a battered and exhausted land. At Arlington National Cemetery on February 5th, Lieutenant Colonel William Nolde was buried. On the list of Americans killed in Vietnam, he was number 57,597.
May they receive strength in your promises of eternal life. And finally, may we continue to serve unselfishly for the ideals of freedom and peace, for which he sacrificed his life.
Whatever their views of the war, most Americans now believed that the cost had been too great, and the greatest cost had been American lives. They believed that no more Americans should die for Vietnam. A few days later, the American prisoners of war began to come home from Hanoi. They were the center of a month-long celebration, their homecoming played and replayed on national television. But America was still committed to South Vietnam. At San Clemente in April, President Nixon publicly restated his support for South Vietnam's President Thieu.
Well, Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, as our joint communique indicates, President Thieu and I have had very constructive talks with regard to how we shall work together in the years ahead, working for the program of peace, which we now hope will all be the wave of the future, not only for the Republic of Vietnam, but for all of the countries in Indochina. Mr. President, we have been allies in a long and difficult war, and now you can be sure that we stand with you as we continue to work together to build a lasting peace.
Nixon also renewed a secret pledge to Thieu. He would respond with full force if the communists broke the ceasefire. Thieu expected American air power to save him, but Nixon's own power was under attack in Washington.
We are beginning these hearings today in an atmosphere of utmost gravity. The questions that have been raised in the wake of the June 17 break-in.
Watergate was undermining the Nixon presidency. Televised hearings revealed the depth of the scandal, linking it in a complex tangle to Vietnam and to Nixon's covert actions against the anti-war movement.
The alleged cover-up that followed.
The White House was continually seeking intelligence information about demonstration leaders and their supporters that would either discredit them personally or indicate that the demonstration was in fact sponsored by some foreign enemy. We never found a scintilla of viable evidence indicating that these demonstrators were part of a master plan.
Some of these events in 1969 and 1970 included intensive harassment of political candidates and violent street demonstrations which endangered life and property. Taken as isolated incidents, these events were serious. Taken as a part of an apparent campaign to force upon the president a foreign policy favorable to the North Vietnamese and their allies, these demonstrations were more than just garden variety exercise of the First Amendment.
I believe that most anyone who worked at the White House during the past 4 years can attest to the concern that prevailed regarding leaks, any and all leaks. That concern took a quantum jump when the New York Times began publishing the Pentagon Papers in June of 1971.